Hi everybody and welcome to Spin Legal. This is show number 32. Just checked it out today, right? So I went through laboriously and counted them all. So
do we get the millionth customer who walks in our door or what?
No, we can praise ourselves when we get 50 shows.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so welcome to Spin Legal with me, Peter Giblett, and her, Angela Browne. And our topic today is what to do when your employer fires you. Okay. And before we get into this, you need to know that Invictus Legal, if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598 or email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal or email me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. And our website is weareinvictus.legal. There you go.
Yep.
Okay. So our subject today is a age-old problem one of what to do when your employer fires you.
Yep.
Right. So there's some practical things as well as some legal things you need to be thinking about in if that were the case, right?
Mhm.
So how do you respond when your employer fires you? And these are the non-legal steps, so the practical suggestions that we can put forward. And I'll go through these. The practical steps, I think the first one is remain calm.
Yeah.
Right? Don't be an idiot. Don't punch your boss in the nose, no matter how much you might think that's worthwhile.
And don't walk in there return when bringing a weapon or anything like that to your workplace, because that'll get you in more trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Just remain calm, remain logical. And when they say things like the pat statement about it's not personal, it's a business decision. Yeah, grin internally, and say yeah, okay, and move on. Right? Okay. So next one, practical steps number 2. Review your benefits, your outstanding compensation, and your severance pay. You can ask your manager about this. They may not have answers the second you are let go, but they will promise to get you answers, right?
Yep.
And this,
Very often, sometimes they will have a letter prepared for you, okay, which will outline that, okay,
yeah,
and sometimes they don't, which to which you can go to your human resources, or you can ask your manager to give you such a letter, okay, so that you'll understand what
yeah,
might be owing to you, like just for your outstanding, and what your severance pay may be, okay. But one of the things if you do have a letter or if they're giving you an offer, do not sign anything, but do take the letter with you, okay? Because
yeah,
you may want to discuss this with somebody.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next practical step is when ask them when you'll receive your last paycheck. And the thing about that is, okay, so you just got paid last Friday, let's say it's now Monday morning, and your boss comes in with a letter and terminates you on the spot. Now, clearly you're going to have to wait for 2 weeks for that new paycheck to come in, which will be probably be your last paycheck. You may or may not get severance pay with that, but you should ask.
Yep, you should always ask if you're
Yeah,
going to be getting any kind of termination pay, and also if and also your ROE, your record of employment.
yeah.
You would want to
Yeah.
get that so that if you need to
Well,
apply for unemployment benefits.
normally that will come along when you're getting the letter from the company to say they're terminating you.
Yeah.
Okay. Next practical question is, will you be paid for unused sick time or vacation days? Now that the answer to that may well vary according to the employer you've got, whether you're unionized or non-unionized, the types of agreements that are in place. There's no general answer on that one.
Yeah,
Right?
like if you're the type who never gets sick and never got sick on the job and your sick days are cumulative, okay,
Yeah.
you might be in for a payday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So there's some of that, and then there's other jobs where I've written policies for them because they wanted to cut back on that sort of thing, where we've had an extinguishment of unused paid sick days at the end of each anniversary period.
Yeah.
So there is a possibility of that too.
And remember this: if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Yeah.
All right. And practical step number 5 is how to continue your health insurance coverages. Pretty essential today to get health insurance. Many job contracts have health insurance. There's a couple of things at play here. They may, for example, you're terminated today, but your health insurance expires at the end of the year, type of thing. That occasionally happens. Depends upon your employer what they negotiated, because in fact, actually, they may have already paid for a year's fees for your health insurance in advance. All
Yep.
right, so you may actually be due health insurance for the remainder of the year. It's
Yep.
possible. I've seen
Exactly.
it happen. I've seen it happen. Sometimes the answer, and again, ask, because the answer, if you don't ask, is always no. Right?
And sometimes there's a possibility that you can continue your health insurance,
Yeah,
right,
that you
by just paying
basically
for it yourself.
you just take over coverage,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
There are situations where you can do that, okay, because you've already started with that health insurance and you can
yeah,
cover it. But it really depends on how the employer acquired that plan.
yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of ways that that can continue or not continue. And
And group,
sometimes you'll have to leave that and then continue on your own by negotiating yourself with that plan.
yeah,
Or you could just continue paying for it.
yeah. All right, next practical step here is identify what unemployment benefits you have the rights to. It's nothing to do with your employer here. You need to go to the EI, look up on the EI website, figure out
Yeah.
what you may or may not have the rights to,
Mhm.
and apply appropriately.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, it always says things like you don't have a right if you're fired or if you quit your job, but there's a lot of exceptions. It's called quitting for good reason. And sometimes if you're fired, that you can always say it's an unfair firing situation. And what I found from Service Canada is that they're pretty flexible in listening to you about things like that.
Well, I was going to say the next step here is discover what your legal rights are, and all of the practical steps up to date may or may not have legal rights associated with them,
Yeah.
right? And especially when you were talking about unusual unemployment benefits that you may have a right to. Don't expect that just because you read off a list on the website, it's going to make 100% sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're better off saying, "Hey, Angela, can you help me? I don't know what it means by this." Right?
Yeah, and then some companies, depending on, especially if you're a senior employee and you've been there for a few years, they also have additional benefits called outplacement benefits, which
Yeah.
help you in your job search to find a new job, to
I
help you get a new career and land in a similar position.
I have one of them.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then they try to offer that because sometimes the company has no choice but to let you go because they're losing money by the boatload or whatever, and they have to let you go. So they at least have a contract with the company to allow you to land on your feet, you know.
Yeah.
Okay? But this is what they have to do, and that's part of their mitigation of damages by letting you go. Okay? So there's a lot of discussion of that. And legal rights are a different thing. These are benefits and employer based benefits that you might have had when you first signed up for your job, or you might have earned as you moved up the ladder or whatever. But your legal rights are your rights as an employee in Ontario. Okay?
Yeah. Well,
And
let's
these
move
are
on to
rights that are at common law and also rights at statute. At
yeah.
statute, it's the Employment Standards Act, and if it's federal, it's a federal labor code. And there's the Ontario Human Rights Code, as well as federally the Canadian Human Rights Act. And then there's other acts like workers' compensation and other acts that might apply. So these things are all stuff that take into consideration what your legal situation is when you're
Yeah.
terminated from a job or if you're on the job and you're having issues. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you're looking at termination, the first thing you have is notice period. Okay? How much notice are you entitled to when you are terminated? Okay? Yes, your boss walked into the room that morning and then they gave you a piece of paper and said you're fired. Okay? That's not what notice period is. A notice period is what you would be otherwise entitled to by law if your boss was going to let you go. Okay? So it could be several weeks, it could be several months, depending on the type of job that you have.
Yeah.
Okay? Notice period, term,
Well, that's okay. So
severance. Yeah.
you're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead. Okay. So first of all, first of these is notice period, notice or payment in lieu of notice.
Yeah, that's
Right?
like your termination period where they say like if you're entitled to several weeks or several months, and that's what you should be getting if you went to a court and asked a court to rule that you're wrongfully terminated. It doesn't say your employer has to take you back. In some cases, in certain things, like say if you're in a union, they might order you back to work, and in some cases, in a human rights type of environment, they might. There are different cases like that, but those are not very common. Normally, they say, okay, the employer made a big, huge mistake and they owe you a pile of money. So they have to pay you that. Okay,
Okay.
so it goes by weeks, how many weeks are, that they owe you. And it goes by the regular salary. And your notice period also includes any bonuses or any commissions that you normally would earn during your week, as well as any expected overtime. Like if you were normally worked at an expected overtime rate of about 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, and you got paid for that overtime all the time when you were working, and then you got terminated, they have to cover and take into consideration the overtime as well. Okay?
Okay. So for a start, a lot of people expect there's at least 2 weeks written notice. So, hey, Angela, I'm sorry, you're no longer a good fit for the company. Here's 2 weeks written notice,
Yeah,
right? That's not always the case, though, is it?
it's not
Because
always the
might
case.
well be that may well be that, hey, I'm wishing to say goodbye to you in 2 weeks. For example, one of the things I'm not going to do is if you're due 89 weeks of employment benefits, I'm not going to let you go in 89 weeks, am I? I'm going
No.
to be saying to you, hey, um, you know, I know that we owe you severance pay for 89 weeks, but here the next 2 weeks, I want you to train Joe, who's taking over from you.
Yeah. And in the
Uh,
meantime, he says, that's it. I mean, I'm going to sue.
Well, good luck. Good luck. But okay, the other point about this one is payment in lieu of notice, right?
Yeah.
That's an
Yep.
important
There's an
point.
employment
Yeah.
standards branch view of it where there is a statutory right to employment payment in lieu of notice where you get 2 weeks notice. Say after 3 months you get a week's notice, after a year you get 2 weeks, onwards up to 8 weeks. And then there's also severance where there's 50 people or more being let go around the same time. Then there's that type of thing is basically employment standards. That's very different than what would a court allow. A court allows bases on common law, right? So many times what employers are now doing is they make people sign agreements saying that if we terminate you, that you agree that you'll only be entitled to the employment standards minimums for termination pay.
Yeah.
Basically, a lot of these agreements have been tossed out of court.
Well, and another aspect about that is okay. So while we're talking in that regard, uh, there's a common statement that's been made out there is that the first thing you should do when you're terminated is go speak with a lawyer, and that the last thing you almost do when you're given a new job offer is go speak with a lawyer, right? In reality, you should go and speak with legal counsel the moment you're offered a job.
Yep. And also to review your new employment contract.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that you don't have anything in that contract that is going to cause you problems.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always told people, particularly if this new employer dragged you out of a former job that was stable and paid you satisfactorily and made you all sorts of promises,
Yeah.
and then you go and then they offer you a contract, I'd be looking at that contract and I would be going through with a fine tooth comb, and I'd want to find out if there's any catches in it that might cause problems in the future should they let you go.
And defining your legal contract before you start the job is an important aspect about it as well, because one of the questions about termination and the severance is that there's a great deal of difference. There's a great deal of scope. You can negotiate severance. So, at a minimum, the severance negotiated must not be less than the required amount for Ontario minimum wage, minimum severance standards.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no reason why you can't negotiate,
A higher, a
two
higher amount.
2 or 3 months pay per year of being with the employer.
Yeah.
Right? You could negotiate a lot. This is where
And
this
this
is
is very important if you're going into a senior position or if you're an
yeah.
older worker or something where you are disadvantaged if in entering the workplace. So you have to consider that when you're going into a new job.
And this is where you negotiate coming into a new job. This is where you negotiate a golden parachute.
Yep.
All
I
right.
did that for one gentleman and I got him an extra when we worked on it and worked with the employer, we got him an extra $80,000.
Yeah.
And he was so happy, eh? Because they let him out with it. I said, doesn't smell right. I told him, because the type of work he did and where he came from and so forth. I said, you need extra because you were pulled out of a previous job.
Yeah.
Okay? So we added a lot on that. And they're flexible. They're flexible because they want to get rid of you bad enough. They better better listen to you. Okay? So I mean, this is something that
and
people are
okay.
willing to pay for that.
And the advice we just gave there is that when go speak to a legal person before you actually get hired, right?
Yeah.
But now we're actually dealing with the causes of termination. So
Yeah, because many people get terminated and then they go in that they want. Yes, your obligation as soon as you get terminated is one of the things you do is you have to look for a job. You
yeah.
have to minimize the amount of time that you're out of a job.
Okay, so that's actually an interesting question. You're 64 and 11 months, 29 days old, and they terminate you. Do you still have that obligation to go look for a job?
Depends. There are some things that might weigh out against the obligation to mitigate, depending if there's human rights damages involved, or if the termination was done in such manner where it has made you sick, or if there's a constructive termination at issue, that could affect your duty to mitigate.
Yeah.
Because there was a situation I represented a guy from a security company, very nice fellow, but he was just treated very badly when he was terminated, and he ended up very depressed. He couldn't go anywhere, couldn't leave the house. So the thing is, they argued that he failed to mitigate his duties. So what we did is we worked on getting the medical to show that he was not capable of mitigating his employment. And as a direct result of the way his former employer treated him, which adds to the damages. And there may even be human rights damages depending on the manner of employment and why he was terminated.
Okay, so we have just talked about notice or payment in lieu of notice, but there are some occasions when notice or payment in lieu does not apply.
Yep. Like say, for instance, if like if your job is there at the pleasure of the crown or the queen, okay? Okay. But believe it or not, politicians do get severance now in Ontario. If they run for
So,
politics and don't get
so if
elected.
I, so if I'm running for MPP and I serve a nice term of 3 or 4 terms as MPP, and then St. Catherine's in its infinite diswisdom decides to dump me as their MPP, I get severance pay.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
That's in lieu of this whole pension business. Okay, they exchanged that. This was a change that was made by Mike Harris.
Hmm.
Okay. Federally, I'm not sure how they do things, but I know that there's a nice little pension starting at 6 years of office, which
I know that, for example, if you were, and this is Liz Truss in the UK, go speak with her because she made a nice little earner. What was she? 14 days as Prime Minister,
wow, that's a
and
record.
she gets a prime ministerial pension out of that.
Oh wow, nice job when you can have it.
Full prime ministerial pension for
Yeah,
14 days, and a
yeah,
guard as well.
yeah. And other situations where there is like when no notice is required, if you were dismissed for just cause,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay. Then
Like say if
okay.
they caught you stealing or if they
Yeah.
caught you copying private information from your employer, or if you got caught
Oh, I
or
better
you
put
were
that document
charged with
away
criminal
now.
offense on the job.
I
Wow.
better put that document away now before
Yeah.
Angela catches me.
Yeah. Or I catch Peter shredding a bunch of documents in the shredder. Okay? And then I go in there and I piece them together like the CSI stuff. And then I see, oh, there's the evidence.
Yeah. Okay. The other one. Okay. The other one in this regard. Let's ask that question, and you can maybe explain then the rights that people may have. Okay. So you've got you when you were employed, you were given 3 months of probationary period. So in that probationary period, can they get rid of you without notice or payment?
Really depends. Like the Employment Standards Act says no, but again, you're entitled to common law rights. So if you felt that you were let go without cause, and or there's a human rights case involved, or you feel that because you discovered that your employer was up to something and you were a whistleblower or something like that, and you discovered this, and then they caught you and said, "Nope, you're gone," you know, you can
Okay.
actually sue. And there has been a fellow who worked for 8 days for a company, and when he was hired, he was computer programmer or something. I forget what he was. And then he got hired, and he told his boss as soon as he got hired, he says, "Okay, I just want you to know," he says, "I have bipolar disorder. And what happens to me is that if you notice me getting kind of like really excitable and I'm really getting busy and just tell me to go home and I'll take a day off and then I come back and I'll be fine. Okay? It's probably because my medication needs adjustment or whatever." He told that to the people that employed him. And then
Yeah,
in
you
the
got.
meantime, the employers go up and they go on the internet and they look at these articles saying bipolar kills six, bipolar and
Yeah.
violence. And then they start saying, "Oh my God, this guy's not going to handle stress or he's going to be violent." So then they bring him into the office and say, "Well, we don't know if you can handle
Well,
stress in the job." He left, he went to the Human Rights Tribunal, he won $85,000 in damage. And
yeah.
then the employer disagreed. He took it to the human rights, the divisional court. The divisional court upheld the $85,000 in damage and said that they can't be doing that because this is all based on stereotype.
Okay, so another one based upon potentially like that. I was just gonna say about halfway through a probationary period, a Chinese employee gets let go. But whilst he's been there, he may well have heard that this company doesn't like non-white employees,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? the potential is there that we are facing a human rights violation.
There is a human rights violation. And also, too, if you pull the employee from another employer that seemed to be a secure employer and you bring him into your company and then you fire them in a week or something like that, that can hit you big time in common law.
Hmm.
Because they
Yeah.
say if they work for that other company for 10 years, you pull them into yours for 5 days, and hey, you could be reliable as though you employed them for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of these things where probationary. So you have to be really careful because probationary is not considered probationary in common law.
Yeah.
Right? You got a contract. Your contract starts by the minute you employ the person. And this is common law. And you don't even have to have a written contract to make that happen. It just happens because people are employed in this country and that's how we do things. Okay?
Okay.
You just can't violate people's rights when you're doing that.
Okay. So another one that's good to know is when it comes to legal rights, there is no notice requirement when an employee terminates their employment.
Most cases, yes, they can just go. Okay? But there's getting to be a building of case law called wrongful resignation. Okay? And people who are employees, particularly the key employees, who are
Well,
responsible
yeah,
for taking
because
projects over.
if you are the chief designer of a company that makes I don't know any gadget, you could be so critical to that company's success that your termination could be considered wrongful. Your resignation could be considered wrongful.
Yeah, exactly. And the company can go after you for due notice, okay, for damages. And they would have to articulate the damages that your resignation actually caused. Like, say, for instance, if you cost them a contract. Say, for example, you were the lead employee on a project, and then you are going to be selling this project to a high paying client. And then you decide that you're going to pull the Johnny Paycheck thing. And you say, take this job and shove it, and you walk out. And then your employee is left empty handed and holding the bag. And they don't have the same contacts you do. And they're sitting there, okay, what do we do now? And the balance of your team is kind of struggling, scratching their head. And
Yeah,
then the client says, okay, now what? Right? And
yeah,
they go somewhere else. Right?
and essentially,
And
yeah, that
you
team.
owe that employer, you owe that employer.
Yeah. Essentially, your team that you just left in that instance is leadershipless and like running around like headless chickens.
Yeah, like the ship of fools.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk an important point here, severance pay. What is it? What is due and how was one calculate it?
Severance is generally, this is one of those things when somebody is let go, hey, let's just say without cause or with cause or whatever. They, like if they're let go without cause or wrongful dismissal, there's said to be 148 factors that play into how severance pay is
Just
determined.
148?
Yeah, there's so many books that have written on. One of the favorite books that I've learned from, and I first got involved in thinking about wrongful dismissal and employment law, is Howard Levitt. Howard Levitt has written a number of books, and I'd love to have him on here someday. He's a very smart lawyer. He's even ran for the bench
Well,
at the Law
invite him.
Society.
Let's have him on. Let's talk about severance pay.
Yeah, and he could talk to us about it, and I'd love to see him talk about some of the cases he handled because the important thing here is severance pay is not just determined by a lot of things. Like there's a lot of things if you're pulled out of a former job, if you're an older person, if you are a higher senior employee, if you got paid a lot of money, um, the type of job that you held, like are you in charge of people,
Yeah.
or products management, that type of thing. There's a number of things there
And
that will add to it.
and again, one of the things about severance pay, we talked about that a while back, was that severance pay, if you're like a salesman or something, and let's say, for argument's sake, that you earn $50,000 as a tech salesman, but your bonuses, let's say in the last 3 years you averaged $500,000. Severance pay isn't just the 50,000; it's
Nope,
the
nope. You
it's the
have to
whole.
include the bonuses, your average bonuses
Whole
over
lot.
the period.
Yeah.
And this is always included. There's some case law that involves that. And I argued that a few times, and I was successful in arguing that because many times what happens is your bonuses are made part of your compensation structure, okay? Because you're a salesperson, for example,
Yeah.
and you'll have a compensation of where you have a base compensation, and then whenever you make a sale, you earn a percentage. Okay, so this is like if you're employing a realtor or somebody, like these are different things that has to be considered when you're telling a person to go, because they're used to living on a particular income, right? Which would include their bonuses, which would include their overtime
Well,
and all this stuff. And
okay.
then all of a sudden, you're gone. It's all gone.
Okay, talk about realtor for a moment, because that's an odd type of job.
It
A
is
real,
an odd type of job because a lot of that is contract.
yeah,
Yeah,
because a realtor actually works for a real estate
brokerage.
brokerage, right? But in fact, hey, it's like, well, Angela, you work for me. You work for me at Remax, or Century 21, or what? Name the company. I don't care,
Yeah.
right? And that's fine. You get to keep all of your 3% on all your sales. That's fine. All you need to do is to pay us, the brokerage, $N a month for for the privilege of being here.
Yep, there's different arrangements that they have, okay? And this is done by contract.
Yeah.
Okay? There is a real estate
But you're
brokerage,
not,
okay,
just to
that
be
can
clear,
that governs that.
just to be clear, in that scenario, you are not a traditional employee.
Right.
For example, you could be here for years and you could make zero sales for 10 years if you were a part-time employee.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden you make 10 sales in 1 year, and then you make zero sales for the next 10 years.
Yep.
Right. So in that kind of relationship, severance, it would be handled. There's no right to severance necessarily.
No, there would be a contractual arrangement that you would look at, okay? And that would be determined in terms of breach of contract as opposed to severance pay.
Yeah.
So if you felt that there was a breach of contract, if your employer decides to say, that's it, we don't need you anymore, we hate the blonde-haired, blue-eyed realtors, okay, and we want to have all the brunettes still, right? They decide that, so there's going to be some issues there, right?
Yeah.
So they
All
would
right.
have to determine whether there is a breach of contract and also what the contract says, what the nature of the contract is.
So
Okay?
how would we calculate severance pay?
Severance pay, as I said, it's calculated. As I said, it varies. This is like the common law version, right? It varies, and it could be anywhere from 2 weeks, and generally it can go up to 2 years. And with some recent cases, even more than 2 years, 24 months.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is very interesting because, and various factors could add up and could increase your severance entitlement. Okay.
Okay. So another question in relation to severance entitlement. What about absences from employment, i.e., let's say that you were sick, you had an extended sick leave for 6 months. You've been there 15 years and you had extended sick leave for 6 months, or you were a pregnant woman and you took child time off to raise your child, etc.
Mhm.
How does that play into the severance package?
Any approved leave, they cannot use that against you. Any approved leave, like you're off sick or off pregnant, or
Yeah.
even if you have a sabbatical, and there's usually sabbatical policy in place for some employers where they can take a year off and write a book or something to travel the world.
So my yeah, okay, that's fine.
But the thing is, they cannot use that against you because that's human rights. Okay?
Okay.
Because you're saying, oh, you're off pregnant. and you keep getting pregnant every year or so, every 2 years. Like, give me a break. That's a gender discrimination.
Yeah. Okay, so is an employer required to provide severance pay in all circumstances?
Um, Most, okay, but generally in some jobs, they just people are okay with the employment standards, and some employers, as I said, are trying to get people to write their rights off. They cannot do that, generally, unless the contract is clear and it's given to them before they commence employment. And there has to be some very clear terms ahead of time about it. And there's a lot of court cases now that are going on that are actually throwing out a lot of these severance clauses,
Well,
termination clauses, they call
one that I can also think of is that potentially if an employment contract has an end date, let's say that the Toronto's got the Olympics up, the next Olympics, and that ends in 2026. So your job is essentially got an end date of the 1st of September 2026.
Yeah, well, that could work. I mean, if you are working up until that date and paid up until that date, but if they let you go before that date, there might be some entitlements.
And again, okay, so take that example that you were due to work up until the 30th of September 2026, and they fired you. They got rid of you on the 1st of January 2026. How much severance pay would you be due? Would that be related to the outstanding amount of time that you've got
It
left?
could, it could, and also to the reason they terminated you, and if there's human rights considerations and a whole bunch of things, they can be in the play. It might even be more than the amount until the end of September.
Yeah.
Okay? So employers who try to use this method have to be very careful that things have to be carefully worded, and that the job is very specially constructed. And you can create a contract position, okay? But they have to show that it is a contract position
Yeah.
where there's a span of control, they call it.
Uh,
Okay?
Okay, so another one that occurs to me in that regard, and there may be no difference here, is that okay, so my company does a lot of sales during the spring and summer term, and we employ people. People, extra contract staff between April, May, June and July.
These are seasonal employees. Like if
So,
you're working in, say, a tourist sector, okay, because you have like everybody in the spring and summer and early fall, okay, and then in the winter time they collect EI.
yeah,
Okay,
so
so
there's no severance
people know they
pay.
collect, and this is a annual ritual, same as people who are farm workers or
Yeah,
most agricultural workers. Not all of them. Some of them still work on the farm over the
so
winter.
there's no severance pay entitlement in that scenario.
Yeah, often they're continued seasonal employees,
Yeah.
right? And because they're expected to come back the next time, because usually there's a 13-week window where people could be laid off on a temporary layoff.
Well, let's move on to that exact subject, layoff.
Yeah,
Right? 'Cause layoff is obviously related to things have gone bad for the company. Generally speaking, things have gone bad for the company. We're having to shut down our Bolton factory, and we're laying off 300 people.
yeah.
That
And
type of
that's when you have to start considering both termination, severance, and there are laws. You have to report this to the Ministry of Labor, and there's there's specific notice you have to give, and there's a lot more notice you have to give on average that the factory's closing down, and people do have rights.
The other area about layoffs, of course, is that it was talked about the other week, I think, with the rail workers strike, where what happened is that rail workers were talking about going out on strike, and the bosses beat them to it and laid all the rail workers off.
Can't do that. People have a right to
Well,
strike.
sorry, they locked them out more correctly.
Oh yeah, locked out, yes, but locked out has another implication, and this usually goes to the labor board, where people would fight, the conflict at the labor board.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but this is what happens. But people are
Obviously,
not technically fired or laid off. They just are not permitted to work when they do that. But this is boss shooting self in own foot. Okay.
well, obviously during union negotiations, there's a lot of tactics applied by.
Yep, there's tactics aside on both sides.
Yeah,
Okay? And
and
this is one of the
normally
things.
what happens is those people are rehired
Yeah,
and they're
they get rehired, all of them, and quite often, like in some cases, they're back paid, but in other cases they're not, depending on the nature of the agreement that they come to.
Yeah.
Okay. Like we had a very, very, very long strike from the public service union when a year ago or so. Remember when we were back in the workers' rights when the CRA people went on strike? They were back in
They
them.
were out for more than 3 days, and the government didn't put back to work legislation together.
Yeah,
And
exactly. The CRA. And I said, workers' rights, all right. Those poor CRA workers are underpaid workers.
okay, so are there any other layoffs? Obviously, we covered strike or lockout. And obviously those circumstances are often beyond the control of the
Yeah,
individual,
these are
beyond the control of the
not stuff
manager.
that generally we go through a private employment things. These are usually through unions, through mediation, arbitration, labor board, and then usually finalized through arbitration, occasionally the courts, if arbitration
Okay,
even is.
so if you're laid off, basically, as I said from the very first instance, the factory just basically took a downturn. We're laying you off for 3 months, and after 3 months, I'm sorry, the situation hasn't improved.
Yep, and then they have to start severing people.
Yep. So
Yeah.
are we then back in the severance? The question
hmm
of severance
hmm
pay?
The temporary layoff is something like, say, during COVID. This is where a lot of people got themselves in trouble. They're saying, well, we just don't anticipate that this is going to be more than a few weeks. So we're going
Hmm.
to lay everybody off. And we all know, as well as I do what happened. And then a lot of them ended up, oh, it's going to be a few more weeks. We don't know. And then pretty soon it's going to be longer than 13 weeks. And then a lot of people were doing that. And then this ends up to be almost like a constructive termination. Okay? I have a client recently where they did something like that with. They decided that they were just laying this person off because there was not enough work, which was really funny because that person went to work every day up until then, and it was a very busy place. She
Yeah.
was very busy. Like there was lots to do. She noted that there was even another person hired recently before she got laid off. And then she got told by telephone that she was being fired. So just hand in all your keys and blah, 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 come into the office, do that. And then I start writing to the employer and asking what's going on. And then they tell me that this was a temporary layoff. And I said, no, it wasn't a temporary layoff. This is more than 3 months since. And the
Well,
thing is,
I was going to say, okay, so that was going to be my actual next question. So, obviously, a layoff was supposed to be there's a time limit there, as you said, 13 weeks.
yeah, I'd say 13 weeks is that. And then there's,
But if at that point, if after 13 weeks, I'm like, I'm sorry, Angela, we were hoping to get you back in, but hey, we've lost another big contract. I'm sorry, we're going to have to terminate you,
yep. And then I
right?
say, where's my
Usually
severance
at
pay?
that point, there's whole severance pay negotiations, and
Yep.
with many of those types of factories, there are union negotiations involved.
Yeah, a lot of them in factories, there's union negotiations, and they do have plant shutdown clauses, in their contracts. What happens if, so the unions actually negotiate these things ahead of time.
So that covers what happens if an employer is unable to recall an employee to work after the layoff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go the other way around. What happens if an employee is given late notice to come back to work, but they fail to turn up?
Well, too bad, so sad.
Essentially, they are gone at that point.
Yep. Yep.
They,
Many times they found another job.
yep.
Hey, or they just decided I didn't like that place anyway. You know, that Peter is a real asshole boss. You know, I don't like British
Yeah,
bosses.
yeah,
I'll never
yeah,
work for a Brit again.
yeah. I've got one of these iron fingers, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the point being is at that point, you know, that is, you know, there's issues. Clearly there's other issues going there, and essentially the employer has ended their own. So for example, that
They
employer,
have to be, but they have to make a sincere effort to reach out to that employee. Like
yeah,
they send a letter, they did, you
yeah,
know, they can't just say, "Oh, I made a phone call and they didn't answer it, so I just then that's it." No, they have to make a sincere effort to bring the person back.
yeah.
And
And I was going to
like a
say, so
letter, that sort of
so
thing. So they have some evidence that they have tried to recall and the
yeah.
person failed to show or respond.
So, for example, they sent an email to their last known personal email address.
Yeah.
They've phoned that last known
Mhm.
mobile phone number or their home phone number, and they've sent a letter to the last known
Yeah.
address.
Yeah.
Now, there was a few examples of that, of course, during COVID, whereby people left. You know, people left their Toronto home. They moved to Niagara Falls, and
Yeah.
they have now a brand new address, a brand new phone number, and brand new email address.
And
Um,
they didn't tell their employer.
yeah,
Not a good thing,
yeah, not a good thing. Okay,
especially if they're thinking of going back to work. And the
and
other thing that really bugs my ass is some of these people, when they were saying that, okay, like everybody's now going to have to work at home. So they're in this tiny Toronto condo and they're really uncomfortable with it. So they sell their condo and move to Niagara Falls. And they said, okay, good. I've got a nice 4-bedroom home in Niagara Falls and beautiful place and cheaper, right? So they have that. And then all of a sudden, the employer's making noises about getting everybody back to work. And unless they said something that this
well, it occurred.
remote work is permanent, you know, like
It occurred
I
to me.
always told these people, like I've had people call me about it. Some employers call me about this, that they were told they had to go remote because of the pandemic.
Yeah,
And I just told them go remote, but do inform your employees that if the pandemic lifts and things are safe at a time, but that you can return to work, that you would have to give them notice that they have to return to the office, okay, or your plant or wherever you are, okay, where you are holding your workplace. Because the problem is a lot of people unfortunately took advantage of this and said, I just moved to Timbuktu, so I'm now 4,000 miles from my office and I don't want to go to work.
okay, there is another aspect about this.
Yeah.
Okay, so if employer doesn't return to work, surely employee, surely that employee would be much better off if they had actually been told, "Hey, I'm sorry, you're fired."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Some of them are being told, and the employer carried out proper steps
Yeah,
about bringing them back to the office. Okay? But unfortunately, not all of them did. And sometimes the employees will get the upper hand where they say, look, you never told us that this would be a temporary thing. Okay? And if people came to work prior to the pandemic and they're all working in the office and their contract clearly says you are to work at Soha 2500 Yonge Street or something. Okay? And this is your place of employment. And then everybody's off during the pandemic. And then after pandemic clears up and you bring everybody back to the office and you're saying that I'm giving you notice that you'll be working back at the office in 6 months' time. Okay? We're giving you preparation, or they do things like return 1 day a week,
and
2 day a week, go up, right?
And
Okay?
you
And
can't
if they don't do that, they can be disciplined.
yeah, and you can't actually say as the employee, you can't say, "It's okay, I'm going to come into the office at 80 King Street."
Yeah.
Because I know you have an office. I know there's an office, a small office, a satellite office at 80 King Street. I'm coming in there every
Yeah.
day of the week, okay?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that, right now, there's still a lot of disputes about that. And there's even legal fights about it. The public sector employees union is fighting about this. I don't know if they will win or not. Okay, they're saying, oh, language was given about this, but that is not in the union contract. Okay,
Yeah,
they did not promise them that in their union contract. They just
yeah.
negotiated something that they would consider this. Okay, and considering something is different than offering or giving something as a policy. Okay,
Okay,
they
so
did some things as a policy, but that was not one of them.
okay, so the next subject is part 3 of the Canada Labour Code provides a procedure for making complaints against a dismissal that the employee considers to be unjust.
Yeah. Yeah, that you can actually take them to the labor board and fight that through that process. Okay. And the interesting thing about it is you can also challenge it whether you're laid off or not. You're truly laid off due to shortage of work at the Canada Labor Board, which I thought was interesting because if my client wanted her job back, that was one thing I would have done. Okay. But she just felt it was just like the bridges were burned literally by the way they treated her.
Yeah.
But this was the kind of thing you just could do this and say, this place is always busy. And they were hiring people up till the time they laid me off, saying there was a shortage of work.
Yeah. On the 12th of March, they just hired somebody new, and on the 13th of March, they laid
Yeah,
you off. That's
yeah,
a bit wrong there, isn't it? There's
yeah,
a bit
it
of problem.
does. It does sound stupid because what they do is they will actually have them there. They will want to know your numbers. They want to know everything, the type of work you have, the revenues. My God. And the employer, they might have to take them back. Right?
Yeah.
Many times they could. Right? That's one remedy. Right? Or they have to pay them proper severance. Right? So there's a lot of these different things that could be done. Provincially, I don't think we can do the same thing. We can make claims like to the court and say, hey, they wrongfully terminated me. They just told me that they don't like what I wear each day. Right?
Well, the next sort of one often is, you're fired, Angela. You're fired through the
What are
text
you,
message.
Donald Trump or what?
Of course, of course, Donnie's welcome here any day of the week, right?
Yeah, we should get him on our next show. Hey, Donnie.
Yeah. No, we got a joke about that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, those kind of things do happen, and we know that. Okay, so let's talk about the last group here. Group termination, last issue.
Yeah, group termination is usually when a division is closing down, or whether a factory's closing down, or whether a greenhouse location is closing down, things like that. There's provisions for that in the labor code and in the employment
So,
standards.
for example, when GM closed their Scott Street plant I think it's Scott Street in St. Catharines,
Yeah,
that would have applied, these rules would have applied.
yeah, exactly. And in their contract, they probably had the right to apply for a job elsewhere in another GM plant, okay? Because they have these different factories in different places, so they might have had a chance to go to Oshawa or something, okay? So, I mean, there's a lot of these different types of provisions. So, when you have a union, the nice thing about having a union is that unions, the people negotiating for the union, they think about these things ahead of time and they put provisions in there to try to protect the workers in different circumstances. Okay, to make sure that if this happens, then Y happens. Okay, if A happens and B happens, that sort of thing to make sure that the workers will get that benefit. Okay. But
Okay.
in a regular employment where you don't have a union, things could be pretty tough. Like I was working with a number of the people from the casino, when they were just throwing everybody off on disability and just letting them go left, right, and center. And a lot of them just kept the bond and they gave them nothing and they terminated some. And by law, they're supposed to give them the same amount of severance pay as they would anybody else who's not on sick leave. Okay? Because
Yeah.
that was Mount Sinai case.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one case that was done before, and it says that people have to do that. Okay, but it happens, and I've remember negotiating. They had that lawyer there at the time, and he knew what was happening. And I said, you better give them all severance. And then what he did is he topped it up with a certain amount, and I said, I want that topped up for all the people that I'm dealing with. Okay, so every single person would have the same kind of benefit. Okay, given because these people were all there since day one when I was working with them. Okay, but for some reason they just wanted to get rid of some of these people who were on sick leave. Okay, you can do that, but you have to pay for it. Your employer has to pay for all this stuff. Okay, you can't be going in there and say, "Oh, I'm just." And if you're just doing it because a person's on sick leave, there might be additional damages owed. Okay, because of human rights. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because this person's sick and though there's a chance they may come back to work but however, I'm going to lay them off anyway because they're no good to us because they're on sick leave. You can't do that.
Yep. Okay. Anything else about termination that we should generally consider?
See, termination is an extremely complex thing as you learned tonight, that there's so many dimensions involving termination, whether you're being fired, whether you're being laid off, whether you're constructively dismissed, whether you're being lured from one job into another only to be let go. There's a lot of different things that termination involves, and it's very complex.
That one thing about taking a skilled employee from one employer, and then letting them go 3 weeks after you've just hired them. I wonder about that, as sometimes it almost feels like, hey, I can help you terminate this employee. I'll win him over to my company, and then 3 weeks later I'll get rid of him.
That happened in one of my cases, and this was between wineries.
Yeah.
And it's like we got 18 dozen wineries around Niagara region.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you become really skilled at the work you do, and then somebody else, like, they talk to each other, these people all know each other. So then they just talk and said, well, I really got this guy, he's getting expensive for me, but there's nothing I have that I can let him go on. Okay, well, let me deal with this. So he promises him even higher pay or whatever, and then all of a sudden they let him go because, it's not working out. I'm sorry, but you can't do that because basically if he's got 5 years previously, it's very often going to be taken a factor in when severance pay is going to be paid out by the second employer. So, I mean, this is, there's a lot of rights for employees, and this very complicated. So this is why I say if you're somebody who's in that situation, we've been laid off and you've been not called back to work, or you're being mistreated at work, where you're in a position where you have to leave, which is also a form of constructive termination, or if you're outright fired. Okay, these are things that you need to do, like do all the first things first. Talk to the boss, get your ideas for your termination, get your paperwork, get everything in order. Then afterwards, talk to a paralegal or a lawyer to help determine what your rights are. Every person's situation is different. Okay? There's a lot of differences between people's termination issues. Like if you're on sick at the time, or if you're an injured worker, or if you're just working and then all of a sudden the employer decides they don't want you anymore, or you're an older person, they're trying to push you to retire. There's all sorts of things that employers do that are just wrong, and that you can seek legal help for all of these things. So you need to don't sign anything, don't sign any paperwork your employer might offer you. Then give us a call or give another paralegal or a lawyer a call, and then bring your paperwork in, and we can tell you whether this is something that would be in line with what they should be giving you in terms of
Yep.
common law relief or whether it's an employment standard relief. We have somebody here who was brought to a job and he wasn't paid. Right? Like, that's employment standards, folks. You can't do that. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to people have to take into consideration. So it's very complex, and this is why when you hear something that we talk about, when we hear something that we talk about on here, it doesn't mean that this is good legal advice for you. Okay, this is why you have to go and seek it and talk to someone about your termination or layoff.
Okay, so we've just been talking about what to do when your employer fires you. And this is, if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so at 905-688-5598. You can email Angela at weareinvictus.legal or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. You can go check out everything on our website at weareinvictus.legal. And then I will leave with Angela's favorite point of
Yep,
the show.
which I just started on just before Peter interrupted me gently. Okay, what you heard today on Spin Legal and previously on our earlier episodes, it is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, and say if you're being offered a termination agreement and a severance package, and you need to have someone to look at, very often your employer will give you the letter but not give you the check. And they want you to sign it before they give you the check. Don't sign anything. Take that paperwork and talk to a paralegal or a lawyer first, and then they could advise you whether this is a good package. And sometimes, because if you do sign it, and then you get the money, it may well you may well be barred from suing. So you may have to accept. So basically, it's better to get your own legal advice that's applicable to your own situation. So talk to a paralegal or a lawyer. It'd be good for you to come to Invictus, but as I said, if you know a paralegal or lawyer, you can go. Okay?
All right. And we thank everybody for coming here, and have a great week. And we will be back with another topic on Spin Legal. Not decided what next week's show is all about yet, but we'll have a surprise for you in a week's time.
Yes. Yeah,
All right.
maybe Peter will jump out of a birthday cake or something.
I don't think so.